When I started teaching yoga many, many years ago, I would often flow from Warrior 1 to Warrior 2. And after years of teaching that, and years of yoga study, and years of watching my students practice this transition, I noticed that it didn't really work. And it wasn't necessarily the safest of transitions. And I'm sure you've all taken classes where you're continuously flowing from Warrior 1 to Warrior 2. And I'm going to explain why I no longer teach that sequence. Warrior 1 is a forward-facing posture. So we face, so my mat's this way, we face the front of our mat. Warrior 2 is an externally rotated position where we face the long edge of the mat. The placement of the feet is different in these two shapes, or at least I teach them differently. So maybe traditionally, Warrior 1 was taught heel to heel alignment. And when you're in this heel to heel alignment, in Warrior 1, we want our hips to face forward. I have wide hips. So you notice that when I go heel to heel, my hips are now more facing kind of somewhere in between Warrior 1 and Warrior 2. I'm not really in either of these positions. And so if the teacher were to cue, square your hips forward, and I try to bring my hips forward, I feel that in my knee. It's causing a torque in my knee, and it does not feel good in my body. And we need to remember that yoga was traditionally taught to young boys. So sure, young boys could do heel to heel, no problem. They're very small and narrow. We teach primarily women. If we look at most of the yoga classes today in the West, there's a lot of women that practice, and all different shapes and sizes. So when I teach Warrior 1, I teach a wider position. This gives me a wider base of support. My hips naturally face forward. I no longer have that tweaking in my knee or my ankle. And for students who struggle with balance, this is far more stable than me being in this tightrope position. So again, from thousands of yoga practices, watching my students, it makes more sense to be in this wide position for Warrior 1. Now, why don't I go from Warrior 1 to Warrior 2? We talk about the importance of building the asana from the ground up. When I'm looking at somebody's body in a standing pose, I wouldn't immediately look at what their head and their shoulders are doing. I want to look at what's touching the floor, because if the foundation is not set up properly, that's going to affect everything else. And if I'm trying to correct them from up high and the foundation is off, then they could potentially fall, or it might not feel appropriate to them. So we always look from the base and then build the pose all the way up. Now, when we transition from Warrior 1 to Warrior 2, what happens? Do we focus on the feet first? No. You'll see this. Inhale, Warrior 1. They rotate open, so the pose is starting from the top, and then they transition the feet into Warrior 2. So sure, if somebody has a really strong practice, they could probably do that and make it look relatively easy. But I work with students of all capabilities, and this transition, not only is it clunky, it's just kind of a clunky transition. It doesn't really look that beautiful. They could potentially fall because they're moving their upper body, they're trying to move their feet, and then it's more of a fall risk. So if I'm going to transition, if I want to transition from a forward-facing pose to an open pose, let's say high lunge, I would first bring my hands down. I would set the foundation, heel to arch. My feet are grounded. I am balanced. And then slowly from there, open up into Warrior 2. It's just a safer transition for most people. Now, on a deeper layer, if we're looking anatomically, deep within the hip, so we have the head of the femur that goes really deep into the acetabulum. And if we're doing these kind of transitions over and over again. And it's even more intense if we're doing it on one leg. So I never go from warrior 3 into half moon. If we're doing these things repetitively, it can kind of wear away the cartilage deep in the hip. And you don't really know that there's a problem until there's a problem. So I know a lot of teachers and students who have practiced really intense asana for years and ended up with hip replacements. That's the reality, that if we're pushing our body to the extreme, that these things can happen. And in yoga therapy, in the Yoga Sutras, there's the sutra that says, Hayam Dukam Anagatam, that yoga is at its best a preventative practice. We're doing these things to make our bodies last longer, so that when we're in our 80s and 90s, we can bend over and tie our shoes, that we can pick up our grandkids, that we can get down on the floor. That's way more important than trying to get your leg over your head and doing these like crazy Cirque du Soleil type movements. So for the general population, if we're wanting to keep our students safe, you keep neutral poses together. So our warrior 1s, our pyramids, our lunges, our warrior 3, everything moving in this plane of movement. We keep these poses together, our warrior 2s, our side angles, our half moons. And if you're wanting to go from forward to neutral, you simply bring your hands to the floor, adjust your foundation, because we always start with the base, and move from there. So that's my soapbox. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day.